I think let's get started. We've had a lot of informal discussions. I think let's get on with the informal stock-taking plenary. So friends, we've had months of vital discussions. We've had 2 incredibly intense weeks of negotiations in Glasgow, and we arrive at what I believe is the moment of truth. And this is the moment of truth for our planet, and it's a moment of truth for our children and our grandchildren. And you all know that the world is willing us on to be bold, to be ambitious, and so much rests on the decisions that we collectively take today. But you know that already. So let me start first by thanking you once again from the bottom of my heart for your hard work, which for some is the culmination of several years of efforts. And I am deeply grateful to the ministerial co-facilitators who have helped us to shift gears and make progress this week. And I'd also like to thank my team and of course our friends at the UNFCCC Secretariat for their intense efforts to convert the fruits of yesterday's discussions into revised texts overnight, issued under my authority as President. These texts are now clean, and we believe that they are the product of a transparent, inclusive, and party-driven process. And it has been founded on listening and the search for consensus. And they've been co-created with you. They've been revised, they've been tested, and they've been revised once again. Now, can I just say, friends, very candidly, that you all know the nature of these negotiations. As presidency, we have effectively had to take into account and balance the views of almost 200 parties. And I completely understand that parties sometimes have different priorities. And yet, we all ultimately have to sign up to the same agreement. I hope, however, that you share my view that taken together, these latest iterations represent the comprehensive, ambitious, and balanced set of outcomes that you collectively called for in yesterday's informal plenary, and indeed in the intense discussions which ran into the early hours of this morning. Outcomes that serve to keep within reach the Paris temperature goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees and pursuing efforts to limit warming to 1.5 within reach. Outcomes that will facilitate the rapid scale-up of action and support on adaptation, that lay the ground for mobilizing the increased climate finance needed to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, and that elevate the importance of averting, minimizing, and addressing loss and damage, including through strengthened institutional arrangements. We're all well aware that collectively, our climate ambition and action to date have fallen short of delivering on the promises made in Paris. And importantly, these texts recognize this and set out a clear response. Now, whilst many will call for that response to go even further, these decisions, I believe, set out tangible next steps and very clear milestones to get us on track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement across each of the 3 pillars of this process: mitigation, adaptation, and finance. And they're guided by equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances. Importantly, these texts also provide a way forward on the 3 outstanding elements of the Paris Rulebook: common timeframes, the enhanced transparency framework, and Article 6. Consensus on these issues, friends, have evaded us for far too long. Today's texts reflect the compromise reached through the effort, collaboration, and civil discourse of each and every one of you. And once adopted, they will facilitate the full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. These texts, along with decisions already adopted, respond to the unprecedented agenda that we faced coming into this conference and demonstrate that parties came to Glasgow to deliver on their mandates, leaving no issue behind. So friends, we have reached a critical juncture where we must come together and bring our hard work to a successful conclusion. You're all skilled negotiators and you're committed champions of your national interests, and I respect that. And of course, we are at that stage in the negotiation when you and your delegations may be asking yourselves whether you can leverage this moment to deliver more for your country, for your region, or your group. And I implore you not to. Please do not ask yourself what more you can seek, but ask instead, what is enough? Is this package balanced? Does it provide enough for all of us? And you have to ask yourself whether taken together, these texts represent a fair balance for your government, for all parties, and with progress being made on all issues. And most importantly, please ask yourselves whether ultimately these texts deliver for all our people and our planet. We know that the climate crisis is a truly global challenge, and ensuring the COP26 outcomes match the scale and urgency of our situation is our shared responsibility. As I said at the start of this conference, we will succeed or fail as one. So I propose that we will shortly adjourn this informal plenary to enable the finalization of documents, and that we meet again this afternoon for the final closing plenaries of the COP, the CMP, and the CMA. And as I said earlier, we do want to conclude this COP this afternoon. Friends, the world is watching us. They're willing us to reach an agreement here for the sake of our planet and for present and future generations. I believe that the texts before you deliver on the expectations and the priorities that you have communicated to my team and to me over the past 2 years, and they do so in a balanced manner, leaving no issue and no party behind. And so I invite you to join together this afternoon to bring this collective effort to a successful conclusion, to demonstrate that unity of purpose that our leaders at the start of this summit and indeed our people across the world demand. So what I would like to propose is that we now adjourn this meeting. I see that there are a number of parties that would like to make interventions. Could I please request colleagues to keep their interventions brief? I know that there are important issues that everybody wants to raise, but I think the time for the general statements are over, and I say that very respectfully. So, of course, we will take interventions that are being made, that are being requested, but please do so recognizing that we want to try and finish today. So with that, I see that Guinea wants to take the floor. I invite Guinea to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Madam Executive Secretary, colleague. The Republic of Guinea has the honor of speaking on behalf of G77 and China. Thank you, Mr. President, for presenting your draft text. The group has taken carefully note on the outcomes. With respect to the CMA and COP decision, we appreciate the recognition that accelerate action in this critical decade is on the basis of the best available scientific knowledge and equity, reflecting common but differentiate responsibilities and respective capabilities in the light of different national circumstances and in the context of sustainable development and effort to eradicate poverty. This is consistent with Paris Agreement and the Convention. On Article 6.2, share of proceeds for the Adaptation Fund, This has been a very important issue, with parties having spent more time and intellectual energy on trying to find solutions that can work for all. The G77 and China members have consulted at ministerial level. It is important for the entire group that all concerns are appropriately reflected. On loss and damage, we are pleased with the progress toward the full operationalization of the Santiago network in terms of agreement on its functions. This is a solid outcome of COP26 in terms of further institutionalizing loss and damage issues under the Convention and its Paris Agreement. The spirit of solidarity, flexibility, and compromise shown by all parties in the negotiating room to move the issues forward in solidarity with the peoples and communities suffering loss and damage from the adverse effect on climate change is the spirit that we must maintain. However, the group expressed its extreme disappointment with paragraphs 73 and 74 on a dialogue related to loss and damage. This is very far from the concrete call for loss and damage facilities that the group came together to make and seek an answer to here in Glasgow. But in the spirit of compromise, we will be able to live with this paragraph as is in the understanding that it does not reflect nor prejudge the unequivocal outcome that we seek on finance for loss and damage to reach the most vulnerable, which due to history and human rights and basic common decency, the group of 77 and China will continue to pursue. To this end, we understand that the dialogue referred to in paragraph 73 and 74 has its end goal the establishment of LD facility. We are also deeply concerned that the loss and damage paragraph in the COP and CMA decision no longer mirror each other. This is not consistent with the joint governance of the Warsaw implementation mechanism that is the status quo. On finance, as we have stressed before, a COP without a concrete outcome on finance cannot be deemed a success. We appreciate the balance that has been achieved in this text with respect to the process for our continued work on the issues on long-term finance and the new quantified collective goal. We also reiterate that filling the gap in the fulfillment of the existing 100 billion remains the responsibility of developed countries. On the work in relation to the global goal on adaptation, we appreciate the text launching the 2-year work program on the global goal on adaptation that we have called for. Work in these issues has been too long delayed, and this needs to be fast-tracked through such a work program. On transparency issues under the Paris Agreement, we appreciate the hard work that has been done to arrive at the balance that reflects the views of various parties. Thank you very much, distinguished Chair.
Thank you, Guinea, for your intervention. China seeks the floor. I give the floor to China.
Thank you, Chair. We have come here with full sincerity, based on science, based on the Convention and the Paris Agreement, based on the rules and mandate of all parties. I thank you, Chair. We have come with full sincerity, based on science, based on the rules and mandate of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. We have fully consulted with all parties, put forward constructive views and opinions, and have shown great flexibility. In this final phase, China is willing to spare no effort to work with all parties to move in the same direction, build convergence, jointly support the conference, jointly support the President to reach the conference so that the conference can reach a balanced, inclusive, and strong outcome that will strengthen the implementation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. In order to promote the success of the conference, we would like to offer a few constructive points. First, maintain balance. We thank the President for listening to the views and consultations of parties yesterday and coming up with a new text today, which is improved and upgraded over the previous version. We appreciate the President for his efforts. China believes that we should continue to deal with mitigation, adaptation, and assistance in a balanced manner, adhere to the principles of moderation, pragmatism, and balance, and fully listen to the views of all parties. Second, focus on the key points. We noted that there are still differences on some issues. And currently, this text is by no means perfect, but we have no intention to open the text again. We believe that there should be edits in small ways. In paragraph number 22 in CMA, for instance, since this content comes from the IPCC report, we advise that in this paragraph, we should clearly add more explanations. For instance, we noted the report of the IPCC so that the expression of the text can be more accurate. About paragraph 36, China suggests that certain expressions can follow the China-US joint declaration in Glasgow, the joint declaration last month, and the related expressions from the G20 conference so that all parties can accept these expressions. Third, we should meet each other halfway. We have noted that all parties have their own concerns in core issues. China hopes that all parties will show maximum flexibility and constructiveness at this final stage. The final outcome should be acceptable to all parties. It should be win-win. Only in this way can we build the broadest global consensus and make the conference a success and drive the multilateral process forward. Mr. Chair, delegates, there is not much time left before the end of this conference. China is ready to work with all parties to provide constructive proposals and ideas for the final outcome, and to work towards a balanced, pragmatic, and robust text that reflects the core concerns of all parties. I thank you.
Thank you, China, for your intervention. I see the United Republic of Tanzania seeks the floor. I give the floor to the United Republic of Tanzania.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving us the floor. Taking the floor because of two key important words that we thought are missing in the decision. And we've been, over the last few days, making submission and trying to express the importance of these two words to be reflected in the decision, considering the challenges that we are facing in our countries and in most developing countries. And we have seen and heard about the impact of extreme event in most of the developing world. That includes causing a lot of death, loss, and damages. So we wanted and we called for inclusion of systematic observation. The need for supporting systematic observation is critical for informing early warning, early action, and therefore reducing loss of life, loss, and damage. Mr. President, systematic observation is critical for us. And in most of our countries, there is a very significant gap in terms of systematic observation. And that affects our capacity to provide effective early warning system, and that leads to increasing death, loss, and damages. Mr. President, Article 7, Paragraph 7C of the Paris Agreement emphasized the importance and the need for strengthening systematic observation, understanding and recognize its critical importance to early warning and early action. But as well, the Convention, Article 4G and Article 5, call for support and enhancement of systematic observation. So, Mr. President, we thought this is a unique opportunity, historical opportunity for us to take action to reflect systematic observation in the decision. That will send a very strong message of our commitment and determination to save life and property and reduce loss and damages. Therefore, we request your consideration, and we've carefully looked at the decision. In the COP decision under science and urgency, there is an opportunity for including just two words, systematic observation, under that part. Recognizing the importance of best available science and systematic observation for effective climate action and policy making. If that is not appropriate, there is still a chance to include it under adaptation, paragraph 6, and also under loss and damage, part 6, paragraph 39. Just to be brief, also in the draft CMA decision, there is a possibility of including systematic observation under paragraph 15. We've submitted and sent email about our proposed suggestion. Therefore, we request your consideration to consider the inclusion of systematic observation in either of the two options that we have suggested. This is the call for action. We will be remembered by our action, but also we will be remembered by our inaction. We thank you very much.
Thank you to Tanzania for that intervention. I see that Mali is seeking the floor. I give the floor to Mali.
Thank you, Chair. And Mali would want to strongly support the proposal by the Honourable Minister from the United Republic of Tanzania, the proposal to insert systematic observation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mali, for your intervention. India is seeking the floor. I now give the floor to India.
Mr. President, thank you for your continuing efforts to build consensus. I am afraid, however, the consensus remains elusive. India stands ready for constructive debate and equitable and just solution in this forum. Climate-friendly lifestyles and climate justice as enshrined in Paris Agreement are the key to solving the climate crisis. The crisis is caused by unsustainable lifestyles and wasteful consumption patterns. The world needs to awaken to this reality. Fossil fuels and their use have enabled parts of the world to attain high levels of wealth and well-being. The UNFCCC refers to mitigation of CHG emissions from all sources. UNFCCC is not directed at any particular source. When we have taken economy by targets, targeting any particular sector is uncalled for. Every country will arrive at net zero as per its own national circumstances, strengths, and weaknesses. Developing countries have a right to their fair share of the global carbon budget and are entitled to the responsible use of fossil fuels within this scope. In such a situation, how can anyone expect that developing countries can make promises about phasing out coal and fossil fuel subsidies? Developing countries have still to deal with their development agendas and poverty eradication. Towards this end, subsidies provide much needed social security and support. For example, we are giving subsidies for use of LPG to low-income households. This subsidy has been a great help in almost eliminating biomass burning for cooking and improved health from reduction in indoor air pollution. I also want to say that there is still a lack of balance in the text, especially the decision 1/CMA3 text between the finance and mitigation sections. Mitigation section includes annual minister-level roundtables, annual NDC synthesis reports, and a new long-term strategy synthesis reports. Requests for revisiting NDCs in 2022, regular updating of LTS, etc., a work program for enhanced mitigation ambition in 2030, and so on. None of this same urgency of convening high-level meetings or commissioning annual reports or progress in meeting the finance needs mentioned in the finance part. Cover decision should not override or introduce extraneous elements in the Paris Agreement process that is already well established and agreed to. There is a well-defined cycle for submission of NDCs. There is no need to deviate from it. We need to respect the agreement and not override it through cover decisions of supreme bodies. These clear concerns in cover decision must be addressed. Para 20 of draft decision 1/CP 26 and para 36 of draft decision 1/CMA3 should be aimed at development of clean power generation and energy efficiency measures. For the world, India has proactively created ISA, CDRI, and the One Sun, One World, One Sun Grid initiative as examples of international collaboration to combat climate change. We are walking the talk. We must see concrete action in this decisive decade and translation of commitments to action. Thank you.
Thank you, India, for your interventions. I see no other parties seeking the floor. So, friends, I want to thank all of those who have provided. I see the European Union is seeking the floor. I give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you very much, President De Alok. And let me start by saying how much I appreciate everything you and your team have done, also together with Patricia, over the last couple of weeks and months, and all of us have been heavily engaged in getting us here. But having listened to the first couple of interventions, I wonder if we're not at risk of stumbling in this marathon a couple of meters before reaching the finish line. And I just want to do one thing now. I have my list of points. I agreed with the ministers of the EU this morning that I would bring to the table and ask for your attention and ask them to be incorporated or given due attention. But I want all of us here, every single one of you, to just for a minute think about one person in your life, one person only, that will still be around in 2030, and how that person will live if we do not stick to the 1.5 degrees here today. And of course we all have our national interests, and of course there are many issues that need to be looked at later. And I fully understand when developing nations say there should be more finances on the table. And yes, we're only at the beginning of what we need to do on loss and damage. Yes, we're only at the beginning of adaptation finance and everything that needs to be done. Absolutely. But for heaven's sake, don't kill this moment by asking for more text, different text, deleting this, deleting that. Everyone's been heard by the presidency over the last couple of months. A lot of respect to every single country in this room was given by the presidency over the last couple of months. And it is my firm belief that the text that is on the table now reflects perfectly well this respect shown by the presidency, and at the same time allows us to act with the urgency that is essential for our survival. So I please implore you, please embrace this text so that we can bring hope to the hearts of our children and grandchildren. They're waiting for us. They will not forgive us if we fail them today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you to the European Union for that intervention. I see that Norway is seeking the floor. I give the floor to Norway.
Thank you, COP President. Thank you, Alok. I just want to give my wholehearted support to what Frans Timmermans just said. We have a very solid body of text here that we are happy with on all tracks. I think every single country in this group would have liked to change a sentence or two or have some other ideas. But I think we do have strong messaging on the 1.5 goal, on the need for mitigation and to do it fast, on adaptation, on loss and damage, which we really understand and really take seriously, on finance and support, and we are also about to land finally the rule book from Paris. And I also would appeal to everybody now to look at the big picture of what we do have. There's something important for everybody in this text, and I think that we really need to set aside our differences, come together and send the message to the world that the world is expecting. So I very much hope that we can coalesce around the text that is now being developed after so much hard work as soon as possible. Thank you, Alok.
Thank you to Norway for Norway's intervention. South Africa seeks the floor. I give the floor to South Africa.
Thank you, Mr. President. South Africa would also like to commend you for your hard work together with your team. And we do not intend to reopen the text that you provided with us. However, we just want to raise one issue around paragraph 36 of cover decision on CMA. We fully concur with the sentiments by China and India. We believe that we can find a workable solution on that particular issue. As we've said yesterday through our minister, we don't believe that one size fits all is a good approach when it comes to this particular issue. and therefore we would just plead with you to hear our voice and accommodate our voice in that particular issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to South Africa for your intervention. Tuvalu seeks the floor. I give the floor to Tuvalu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Glasgow has delivered a strong message of hope, a strong message of promise. Glasgow has delivered a strong message of ambition. What is left now is for us to deliver on that promise. I sympathize with the honorable gentleman from the European Union who yesterday showed us the photo of his grandson. I too am a grandfather of 3 little children, and I keep looking at their photos every single night after returning from these halls, thinking, what would I tell them upon my return from Glasgow? I will now be able to tell them that Glasgow has made a promise to secure them their future. That will be the best ever Christmas gift I will present to them. We have now embarked on the Glasgow train. The Glasgow train of ambition. The Glasgow train of 1.5 degrees. Climate change is real. There is no politics in climate change. So my fellow political leaders, our response to climate change should never depend on whether our domestic response to climate change would get us re-elected in the next elections. Responding to climate change is critical to our survival of our communities, the survival of humanity. It is not and should never be linked to our political survival in the next elections. So friends, we urge all countries to board this Glasgow train. We need to continue to work hard to keep this Glasgow train moving and moving fast so we can reach the next COP at Egypt and deliver on that Glasgow train of ambition and 1.5 degrees. So in closing, Mr. President, we thank Glasgow. We thank the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and your presidency, Alok Sharma, and your team for your able leadership. And we thank Glasgow for keeping us safe. Friends, Glasgow ends today, but the real work begins now. We must now deliver on the Glasgow train of ambition and 1.5. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Tuvalu, for your intervention. Antigua and Barbuda is seeking the floor. I give the floor to Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Excellencies. I speak on behalf of AOSIS in line with the statement by the G77 and China, which signaled that we have a package in front of us. At the outset, we would like to thank you and your team, Mr. President, for your tireless efforts in helping us to get this far. Although promised that we would finish last night, we appreciate the additional time to mature some important issues. AOSIS members have made a tremendous effort to be here Some members in our group will travel up to 5 days to remote locations on the front lines of climate change. 2 weeks ago, AOSIS indicated that we expected a return on our effort, and we are now over time and the clock is running out. This morning, our group was reflecting on whether it was all worthwhile after this final push, and there are a few things that hang in the balance. In this package, we have priorities that are included, which we cannot go home without, including elements of the mitigation section already mentioned, and elements in loss and damage that aren't there, for which we're extremely disappointed. And we will express our grievances in due course. However, AOSIS leads with the spirit of compromise, and we implore all parties to support our common outcome and move forward. We know what is at stake for our membership, our homes, and our cultures. We strongly question whether elements of this package could undermine our 1.5-degree march, but we trust that we have to go through this journey, and we implore colleagues again to take this step with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Antigua and Barbuda, for your intervention. Fiji seeks the floor. I give the floor to Fiji.
Thank you, Mr. President. Some of us may not be able to have the full ability to fully embrace all the outcomes, and it may be somewhat constrained, but I think we need to support the outcome of this conference overall through consensus, because that is critically important. Very briefly, in the interest of time, Mr. President, while it has taken far too long and comes riddled with caveat, as some may see, we do welcome the draft text calling for the phase-out of coal and fossil fuel subsidies. This is the first time we've seen tangible movement, with specific reference made to two of the two greatest drivers of warming. We welcome the renewed commitment by developed country partners to meet the USD 100 billion target. We also welcome the draft decision text on the long-term finance, and to extend the independent monitoring of the $100 billion target to 2027. In 2015, 1.5 degree was a compromise the Pacific nations made in the Paris Agreement for the sake of collective action. Today, we make that compromise also regarding loss and damage, and we've been asked to do this, and we will do this. For the sake of the collective action, we need to prevent a cataclysmic future. We believe we support paragraphs 73 and 74 with the understanding that the dialogue referred to in these paragraphs will set out the start of a process through which we can expect real engagement and practical solutions that will produce a finance-based outcome on loss and damage by COP27. Mr. President, we believe that these negotiations represent our best and only chance of securing the collective intent and shared action needed to manage the scale and complexity of the climate crisis. We need to build, and let's build on the progress we've secured and work towards an outcome at COP27 that delivers tangible and equitable progress. With that, we support the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiji, for your intervention. The Marshall Islands seeks the floor. I give the floor to the Marshall Islands.
Mr. President, Excellencies, thank you, first of all, to everyone here, but especially to your team, Mr. President, for the very long nights and the very impassioned efforts, I think, on everyone's behalf at this COP to bring it to a successful conclusion. I think that the question we all need to ask ourselves at this point is this: are we ready to leave this COP without an outcome after all the efforts that have been made to hold it in the midst of a pandemic? And I ask this question very sincerely, particularly for those of us who came from the Pacific, and also for those of us who really could not make it. There are many of us who could not make it here. And we have worked over time to ensure that as a region, we were together so that our voice could be heard in this space. And can we go back to our home islands, to our communities, with nothing? And for my country, the answer to that is no. I am not willing to leave here with nothing. We have a text in front of us. It does not have everything that everyone wants, but it has extremely important elements that do serve the planet. It is not perfect. It is not without fault. We have much work to do, but it does represent real progress. And that is what we need at this moment. We cannot afford no progress. There is work to do on loss and damage, and I think my colleague from Fiji has pointed to that. And we know, and we commit to focusing on this over the coming year to find actual solutions, real way forward. And we hope that we not just hope, we expect that partners will go with us on that journey. At the same time, there are elements of this text that do acknowledge the urgency of our plight. It brings us back together next year with a firm deadline for enhanced NDCs to get us on the trajectory to 1.5 that is the lifeline for my country. And I argue it's the lifeline for everyone in every country. It moves us towards ending fossil fuel subsidies, which have no place in a sane economy, and to an end at last to coal. It doubles financing for adaptation. And I really must insist we cannot let this go unnoticed. This package, this Glasgow train, is a step to helping countries like mine who must transform our very physical environment in the coming years to survive the onslaught of climate change. This is an extremely critical step that I cannot afford to lose. Excellencies, colleagues, and Mr. President, progress does entail sacrifice, but we have to acknowledge progress. We cannot afford to give up on the promise that this package offers us. And others have referred to their grandchildren. I'll refer to my children. At the end of the COP in Madrid, I had to go back home and say to my children that I'm afraid we did not deliver. And I cannot afford to do that again. Thank you. Komotada.
Thank you to the Marshall Islands for that intervention. I see that Gabon is seeking the floor. I give the floor to Gabon.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to wait until later, but it seems like we're all talking now. We came to Glasgow to create an ambitious and balanced agreement, focusing on mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, and finance. In the run-up, much of the focus was on 1.5 degrees, on mitigation. Here in Glasgow, we've achieved movement on the global goal on adaptation, and we will be starting an ambitious work program, which is great. We have a collective goal on finance. We are moving, perhaps slower than we wished, but on the special circumstances of Africa. We will have a review of the $100 billion under the COP, making that much more transparent. We have ambitious adaptation and mitigation work programs moving forwards towards COP27. We will use the needs report to develop a collective goal on adaptation linked to finance. We will increase dedicated climate finance to the GEF. We have language on a just transition. We have increased adaptation on mitigation, which is more ambitious than Paris. We have pledges on adaptation finance, even though some of these are conditional and may come to nothing. We don't have a guarantee that within the $100 billion that the debt burden of developing nations will not increase. We have an extra 300 million for LDCs, but there's already a pipeline in the GEF of 300 million. We've dealt sensibly with corresponding adjustments for non-NDC activities in Article 6. On pre-2020 transition, we have a position in Africa that there should be no transition because it will result in hot air. What we have in front of us is 2013, and forests, through REDD+, have been excluded from that. We have to insist here on atmospheric integrity through this process. And we fear that Article 6.2 might be opening the door to voluntary REDD credits outside the strict UNFCCC rules. But more importantly, Africa's red line on the share of proceeds has been rubbed out with no compromise. We have a text that is weaker than the compromise that we had in Madrid. And we fear that the discrepancy between 6.4 and 6.2 will result in leakage from 6.4 to 6.2. And that the 5% that we have gained on 6.4 will come to nothing. But the real issue for Africa is scaled up, predictable funding for adaptation and loss and damage in Africa. We are the continent most impacted by climate change through geological time. 2,500 years ago, the Bantu peoples of Nigeria, Cameroon, and Gabon were driven by climate change to walk all the way to South Africa. My people in Gabon understand the traditional war songs of the Zulu in South Africa. So Africa risks being destabilized by climate change. It's already, in certain of our countries, a matter of life and death. Already we're seeing some of our nations failing. Mitigation, of course, is critical to minimizing this human tragedy. But we already face a huge financial, technological, and capacity building issue as we struggle to adapt to a problem that not only we did not cause, but through our nature-based solutions, we dampen significantly. We cannot go home to Africa without a reliable package for adaptation. We've been asked to trust the very significant, but nevertheless voluntary commitments here. And before I leave, I need some more reassurance from our developed country partners. And note that I don't say donors. Before boarding the electric train leaving the Glasgow COP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabon, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Bolivia.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I want to associate myself with the statement of Ginny on behalf of the G77 and China. Bolivia speaks on behalf of the like-minded developing countries, LMDC. Mr. President, still we have issues and deeply concerns regarding the draft text and the proposals you presented to the parties in this conference. We have reflected very deeply in these concerns, and however, with the spirit of compromise of the LMDC, in order to increase the ambition that the world is expecting for all the countries, we are able to support the document and move forward. The LMDC President, the heads of delegations and the members of the countries have worked very hard in this COP in order to halt an unfair push of some countries to transfer their responsibilities to the developing world. We've fought very hard in order to preserve the common but differentiated responsibilities instead of shifting a concept of the global or the common but a shared responsibilities. We think that you have achieved a delicate balance in the COP decision, strongly supporting the existence and the importance of the equity and the common but differentiated responsibilities. However, we see still in the text, in the document, that there are very concerning concepts that are not going to give us and to move to the world to the right direction, such as the net zero by 2050. We think that this is a great fallacy for the world. It is impossible to achieve the 1.5 within reach in the context of the net zero by 2050. We think that this is the great escape of developed countries and to escape from their responsibilities with climate change. Developed countries will continue using the carbon budget that belongs to the developing world, and this is not fair. We need to really push developed countries not to get the net zero by 2050, but to achieve real reductions of emissions now. That is really the direction to provide a real solution to the climate change. Climate change for developing countries, President and colleagues, is not only about climate. Climate change is about the life of the people. Climate change is about sustainable development. Climate change is about addressing the poverty eradication. That's why we need to enforce the commitment to enhance ambition in the developed world in order to keep the developmental rights of the developing world alive. As LMDC President, we refuse to get trapped in the carbon colonialism. Developed countries are trying to create a new rules of the game to address climate change, where only developed countries will have the conditions to move into the transition to a low-carbon economy. Because developed countries have the financial conditions and have the technological capabilities to move in this transition, creating more dependency for countries of the global South. The fight, President, of the LMDC is to move in a very balanced approach in the context of the Paris agreement. We see with concern, President, that the powerful and rich countries are still refusing to provide financial support to developing country parties. We fought very hard in this COP, President, in order to keep the connection between the 1.5 degrees within reach with the means of implementation, in order to articulate finance with loss and damage, finance with adaptation, and finance with increasing ambition of developing countries. And we still have to face the problem that there is no appetite. There is not a mood for developed countries to address their historical responsibilities, their climate debt that they have to pay to the developing world. This is still an issue that we need to address, probably not in this COP, but in the next COPs. We do need a moral commitment of developed countries to continue providing finance to the developing world. We want to say to the developed countries, you have to be aware that you are leaving developing countries alone if you refuse to provide financial support, technology transfer, and capacity building to the developing world. You have to be aware that the net zero by 2050 is not the solution to address climate change. Developed countries have to be aware that are leaving to the youth the responsibility to address the fight against climate change. President, since we are not going to move into a discussion of the content of the proposals, however, there are still minor comments that we want to address in this context. I think it is very difficult to keep languages such as in the COP26 referring to the processes and principles of the convention. We do not understand that kind of new languages. In this context, we always have referred to the principles and provisions of the convention, so we think that we need to go back to that language. Also, there are a very minor problem in the text, in the CMA. It's a comma. It's a comma, but it's a very important comma in paragraph 4 and paragraph 23. It's a comma in between respective capabilities and in light of national circumstances. This comma is very important. We fight a lot of time in Paris in order to put this comma in the text. Also could be very important to remove and to replace the paragraph regarding the Article 3.5 of the Convention related to unilateral measures, and to remove or to move from the collaboration part to the preambular part, because, well, unilateral measures are not related to a collaboration. Unilateral measures are really working against collaboration. So that is also a suggestion for doing that, a President. So, President, we see that the text of the COP26 that we are going to approve are not the solution to address climate change, but are the steps in the right direction to work together in the fight against climate change. We appreciate very much your efforts, President, of all your team and the other parties and the colleagues for having these documents concluded and approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bolivia, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Switzerland.
President Alok Sharma, Honourable Ministers, dear colleagues, I have the honour of delivering this statement on behalf of the EIG. The EIG appreciates the efforts done by the Presidency to bring up these decisions. It is not unnormal that we leave a COP with decisions that left everybody a little unhappy, but we are concerned that we are leaving this COP with everybody more than a little unhappy. Several of the texts that you are presenting today are clearly far from being the best possible common denominator. We have the impression that the process since the beginning of this week became increasingly less inclusive and less transparent. We deplore that because we are sure that working together brings better results. Let me just give an example. The guidance on Article 6. We do not know why the option A on accounting in the Article 6 text was changed overnight. We are convinced that we could have found better solutions to address the different problems by negotiating between parties rather than with the Presidency. Mr. President, after having listened to the different interventions and interacted in parallel within our group, after having listened to the appeal from many, the EIG can inform you that we can accept the text as presented. We agree with others. We have to look at the big picture. We do not have to lose sight of our common objective to keep temperature increase under 1.5, to raise ambition for adaptation, and to ensure adequate and effective support for all who have the capacity, to all who need such support. In the light of that broader objective, the EIG can adopt the text.
Thank you, Switzerland, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Costa Rica.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for all your leadership, your hard work, and thank you for all the work and the hours that your team has put into this process. We're here. We came here to Glasgow to deliver, to make decisions. Yes, we don't have the perfect package, but we have the possible package. There's a lot of elements that we would like to see also included, a list of aspects, but we know that we are in the moment where we need to take this and see what is possible to take as a package. And for us, it's very important then to try to understand that it's about that, about agreeing on a balance aspects in many areas. There are progress in different areas, we acknowledge that. Yes, as we mentioned, it is not the perfect one, but it is one that we can live with. What we have in the package in Article 6 is not the optimum, but it's what we could agree here today in Glasgow. But we are committed to continue working with our partners around the world and with the San Jose Principles Coalition to ensure the highest integrity of international markets. And in the spirit of compromise, we welcome and we support this package as it is. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Costa Rica, for your intervention. I'll now give the floor to Bhutan. Bhutan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Bhutan is taking the floor on behalf of the LDC group. First, we would like to align our intervention with the G77 and China. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we all understand we are at this last hour, 1+ day at COP26. 1 billion of our people in the front line of climate crisis already experiencing a mounting onslaught of loss and damage that has taken lives, destroyed lands, livelihoods, ecosystem, heritage, and culture, never to never to be the same again. LDC Group came to COP26 with high expectations, a call for ambition to be raised within this decade in line with 1.5 degrees Celsius, assurance on climate finance, and most importantly, decision on loss and damage, and particularly finance for loss and damage. We do agree with many that the text is not balanced, but we do also understand that the text will not make us all happy. On this note, we would like to register that the outcome on loss and damage was not what we expected. From the very beginning of this meeting, we stated our position that loss and damage should be reflected equally both on a COP and also CMA decision and have clear process to provide support for loss and damage. But at this hour, we do understand this is not the time for us to fall back into our differences. This is the time to unite around our shared commitment to we have all come here to do, adopt a text that moves us towards a response that is adequate to address the climate crisis. We know that it is not enough, but we also know that this will not get us all the way there. That is not the nature of these things, but we can take an incredibly important step forward together today. So let us do that and adopt the text in front of us. I thank you, President.
Thank you, Bhutan, for your intervention. Peru seeks the floor. I give the floor to Peru.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Peru has the honor to speak on behalf of Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Honduras, Guatemala, and Paraguay. We support the text as it is. We support your efforts to take us over the line, Mr. President. We are confident that that's what you will do and answer your call for support to finish the work. We will refrain from making a lengthy intervention and are confident that you will continue to be bold and uphold ambition to keep 1.5 alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Peru, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Australia. Australia, you have the floor.
President, thank you. I want to thank you and your team for all the work over the last 2 years, and particularly over these last 2 weeks, which we know has been particularly tough. I want to also acknowledge the work of ministers that have been assisting as co-facilitators on the key issues for your efforts to develop the final decision text for COP26. And I also want to thank other delegates and friends for their determination to find common ground. Mr. President, from the outset, this COP has been a COP of ambition, to bring the global community together to do more, to strengthen action on mitigation, adaptation, climate finance, to complete the Paris Agreement rulebook and keep below the temperature goal below 2 and keeping 1.5 degrees within reach. Yes, there's always difficult decisions and debates we need to have. Australia can accept the present text, and we call on other parties to look at how we can come together to deliver a successful outcome at COP26. Transparency is critical. The rules need to be finalised and ensuring that we can all be consistently reporting against our emissions. The rules for how we deliver carbon markets is critical. We need to ensure that we've got a way to drive high integrity and mobilise greater private sector. We also welcome the recognition of the need to address issues of human rights and the rights of Indigenous people in Article 6. We also recognise a strong focus on climate finance. Australia is committed to doubling its climate finance and ensuring that we can contribute to the $100 billion goal. We also have heard the need for a greater focus on adaptation and the doubling of adaptation going forward. We've also heard the call for loss and damage and acknowledging the need to look at how we tangibly deliver a greater focus on loss and damage and how we particularly support national and regional efforts to address this. Mr. President, Australia looks forward to the finalisation of the proceedings today and leaving here, as other colleagues have said across the Pacific, that we deliver on what we've come to do. We can accept the text and we look forward to working with people and delivering action as we go forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Australia, for your intervention. I'll now give the floor to Grenada.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I associate with the statement made earlier by the representative from AOSIS. Mr. President, my message is a short and simple one. The journey to get us this far has been long and uncomfortable. The text on the table makes us all uncomfortable, but it should. What the world expects from us is difficult, very, very difficult, but necessary for our collective future and the future of generations to come. But as uncomfortable as we all are with the text, as imperfect as it is, it does bring sufficient enough balance for us to move forward, and it does provide us with the best chance at this time to keep 1.5 alive. We now need to take this and move forward. We must move forward today. We cannot resolve all our outstanding issues here and now. Others have spoken to the deficiencies. I do not need to repeat those. But we also must remember that Glasgow was not the destination, but another step forward in the process and this very long journey. We've deliberated enough. We've represented our national positions well. But now is the time to consider our collective position and reach consensus and adopt the text that is before us. We cannot leave here today without doing so. Failure is not an option. The world expects more from us. This is our moment of judgment. Let us adopt what we have. Let us close this session and continue the fight tomorrow and the day after and the weeks, months, and years ahead until the job is done. Mr. President, I thank you.
Thank you, Grenada, for your intervention. I see that the United States seeks the floor. I give the floor to the United States.
Mr. President, thank you very, very much for your leadership and for the efforts of your entire team. From way down here where I'm sitting, we get to look across a vast hall of people. And I'm thinking about the different lives that are out here. The extraordinary number of people who've come together here in Glasgow, but it isn't the 2 weeks here. Months, years for many. It is time to come together for future generations in ways that none of us really ever thought we might have an opportunity to do. 200, almost 200 countries, people from every walk of life. And we each have our own priorities, for sure. As Simon just said, you know, there's a discomfort. Well, if it's a good negotiation, all the parties are uncomfortable. And this has been, I think, a good negotiation. We are seeking the shared goal of keeping the Earth's temperature at the level that the world scientists tell us we must do. And yes, there are things in this text that every country here can come up with that doesn't meet their best desire. But obviously, we know the old adage of negotiation: you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And this is good. This is a powerful statement. I think there's an inclination for all of us, because these 2 weeks are long, to have almost forgotten the first couple of days. The power of all of our leaders being here, the promises, the commitments that were put on the table. And so we in the United States are really excited by the fact that this raises ambition on a global basis. It sets standards by which we will measure. It asks everybody to be part of the process. And we have done something significant on not just mitigation, but increasing adaptation, resilience, scaling up adaptation finance, and moving forward on loss and damage, as tough as that's been previously. I want to affirm to some of those of you who've been concerned that we look forward to participating constructively in the dialogue on loss and damage and contributing to its success. We've also strongly supported inclusion elements here that will set long-term net zero GHG strategies. And for our friend from Gabon, who asked specifically that he have some better assurance before he leaves here regarding the adaptation funding, let me just make assurance, at least from our part, and I think from our close allies and friends. I can assure our friend from Gabon and from the other countries concerned that every effort in the world will be made. There's a commitment that is real to double adaptation finance, including our announcement that we will double our own and work in other ways to deal with the challenge of adaptation. So we are poised. We are poised to make a remarkable step here to reflect the best outcome possible on the Paris Agreement itself, on the rule book, on things like common timeframes and NDCs and Article 6 guidance, all of which are tough, but where everybody has approached this with a remarkable spirit of compromise and of global intent. So I would simply say, in sort of thinking about the next moments here, this potential agreement, which we're poised to accept and make real, is a very important step in the right direction. As I think about it, the agreement that China and the United States came to the other day, I know we both talked about this, hope it shows that even in a world where there are conflict and competition and differences between nations, that this issue can bring people together in an effort to try to reach above those and to find the way forward. I close just by saying to everybody, not everybody in public life, I've been in public life a long time, not everyone in public life, and we are all in public life, whether you're there permanently or temporarily in this endeavor, but not everyone gets to make choices about life and death. Not everyone gets to make choices that actually affect an entire planet. We here are privileged today to do exactly that. So I hope before long we are going to ratify this, accept this text, initiate a critical set of choices for all citizens around the world for this decade, so that we can in fact guarantee to our children, our grandchildren, to the next generations that we did our job. And I'm proud to be here and be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you to the United States for that intervention. I now give the floor to the Maldives. Maldives, you have the floor.
Excellencies, Mr. President, I acknowledge the complexity in getting all parties to agree and echoing the spirit of compromise expressed by fellow member states. The Maldives accepts the incremental progress made in Glasgow and supports the statements made by AOSIS. I'd like to note this progress is not in line with the urgency and scale required. I would like to note that what is balanced and pragmatic to other parties will not help the Maldives adapt in time. It will be too late for the Maldives. For some, loss and damage may be the beginning of conversation and dialogue, but for us, this is a matter of survival. So while we recognize the foundations that this outcome provides, please do us the courtesy to acknowledge that it does not bring hope to our hearts, but serves as yet another conversation where we put our homes on the line, while those who have other options decide how quickly they want to act, save those who don't. We have heard that the technology is available. We know trillions are spent on fossil fuels. So we know that this is not about the lack of science or funding. In conclusion, Mr. President, in response to request to go forward with this text, yes, the Maldives will, but in return, the Maldives implores you to embrace this outcome, to go beyond dialogue and deliver the action and resources we need to address the crisis in small islands in time. I would like to remind us all that we have 98 months to halve global emissions. The difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees is a death sentence for us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you to Maldives for your intervention. I see that Brazil seeks the floor. I give the floor to Brazil.
Thank you, Mr. President. Brazil wishes to once again show its appreciation for the hard work of all our partners to cross the finish line. I would say that we have worked hard in the past 2 weeks for this agreement, but that would be inaccurate. We have worked hard over the past years, months and weeks, and we can see the results in front of us with the latest iterations from the presidency on several issues of crucial systemic relevancy to the Paris Agreement, including Article 6, the transparency framework and common timeframes. On Article 6, Brazil and many other parties have long supported positions in several key areas of cooperative approaches under the Paris Agreement that are not reflected in the current text. A great deal of the multilateral process refers more to trimming and wordsmithing to make room for all positions to be reflected in a way that the agreement can stand. Brazil believes we have reached this delicate balance that can allow for this agreement to stand, to be operationalized and start fulfilling their mandate within the Paris Agreement. Brazil had preferred the text to be different in many cases, But we arrived at this COP not only with our positions and preferences, but also the mature understanding that these negotiations need to be finalized. This is why we support the current text to be the basis for our work in the coming years. They have struck a delicate balance that we had not seen before. They are not perfect, but they are workable. We are pleased to see that Article 6 in particular will provide not only way to facilitate parties' implementations of NDCs through the use of units to be adjusted, but also allow for a new channel for international finance to flow to developing countries' mitigations efforts through support units. Our work is not finished, and Brazil now looks forward to continue to engage with a view to implement Article 6. Mr. President, in the spirit of compromise, we support adoption of all the draft decisions on all issues that you presented us with this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brazil, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Turkey. Turkey, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, we would like to express our gratitude to the Presidency for their hard work of all agendas and efforts of producing decision texts. We believe that they give the right signal to the world. Turkey is ready to be constructive to finalize all efforts today. We support the text. We support the Presidency. We support all endeavors. We owe this success to our children. I owe this success to my own voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Turkey, for that intervention. I now give the floor to the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. We humbly take this floor to point to a concern that may be critical. Technically, we refer to Annex 1, Item 1B of the draft decision on Article 6. The proposed text missed the term avoidance. In detail, paragraph B should read, emission avoidance, reductions and removals, including mitigation co-benefits, resulting from adaptation actions and/or economic diversification plans, or the means to achieve them when internationally transferred. We ask that attention on this be made because avoidance is a legitimate technical action in the risk management continuum, which will be cost-effective for all of us in the long run. Both pollution, source, and impact management involve a very important choice of mitigation action: avoidance or prevention, because here we still can. May we also point out the fact that GHG and climate impact mitigation are not the ultimate goals, because sustainable development is. Avoidance allows us, countries with very little GHG emission, to contribute more in the fight against climate change. We express this among our other concerns, such as finance, in the spirit of solidarity, and our country will continue to fight and to act some more in a balanced and responsible manner. While we commend the Clean Energy Demand Initiative, the promise of offshore wind and its potential in the Philippines, the Glasgow progress on loss and damage, and the various finance discussions attended by our head of delegation, we believe we still have a long way to go. Perhaps all of you have heard how the Philippines has endured the strong typhoons and other impacts of climate change. Yet as a country, we are still here, hopeful. As a country, we're hopeful for us to continue to move towards more knowledge, more collectivity, and more action. As a country, we remain hopeful that we come out of Glasgow hungrier, not because we have not had lunch yet, but hungrier for more action and more united. We thank G77 leadership and members. I believe we have done well. In closing, we thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. We thank Glasgow and Edinburgh, and Scotland and the UK for the hospitality. The Philippines is thankful. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Philippines, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Nigeria. Nigeria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies. Nigeria would also like to join others to thank you and your team for the efforts to guide this COP to a reasonable conclusion, and we hope an equitable one. We would like to support the earlier statement by Guinea on behalf of the G77 and China and other members of the group. Particularly, we would like to support the interventions by India and South Africa concerning para 36 of the document being deliberated upon. We, like others, look forward to a good outcome to this COP. However, we would kindly ask you to consider this para particularly in the light of equitable progress on all climate action by developing countries. Again, we thank you for the floor, and this is our submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigeria, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Palau.
Thank you, Mr. President, for all your work over the last few months, and especially these last 2 weeks. Thank you to your team. When we in the Pacific Islands say that we really need to act with a great sense of urgency, it's because that as we are sitting here at this COP, we're getting images and texts from our neighbors that are telling us that their homes are getting flooded as we speak. So there's a little girl who's sitting in her room, her bedroom belongings have been flooded, her textbooks are wet, she can't go to school. Her parents are despondent because they haven't been able to protect their families. So these kinds of stories are not unique to Palau. You'll hear similar stories from our island neighbors like the Marshall Islands. My sister from the Maldives also urged the same kind of urgency. And we haven't taken enough action since the Paris Agreement, and so we're seeing climate change happen all over the world. There's severe droughts in Kenya, there's infrastructure damage in Japan, the subways are flooding in New York. And if we don't act today, we're gonna see some really scary things in the future. The children of the Asia-Pacific region will not have enough to eat because the warming waters of the Pacific won't be able to sustain the sea life that feeds the world. The children of the Middle East won't be able to breathe the hot desert air. So I really want to ask us to all come together here, because I don't want to go home to my 3 children and say, I'm really sorry that I failed you at COP26. I think we're all in a really important and unique position today, and I implore you all to come behind. I know we're not happy. 200 countries coming together are never going to be happy. Palau is not all the way happy, but we have to take action today. So we accept this text, we thank you for your work, and we hope that we can move together in the spirit of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Palau, for your intervention. Colleagues, I'm very grateful for all the interventions that are being made and for the very constructive nature in which people are approaching this. I would just say that we've got another 10, 11 now speakers, parties. I have no wish to curtail discussion. It's right and proper that if parties want to speak, they should. But just bearing in mind the time and that we also want to move to a formal plenary and close, if I could request that colleagues are brief and if they would indulge me, perhaps only if they have new points to make to come in to speak. But thank you very much indeed. I'd now like to give the floor to Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this COP is about to produce tremendous results. We have to adopt the text in front of us. Japan supports the President's text as such. We should not leave Glasgow without any conclusions with us. Particularly, we need to adopt the text on the Paris rulebook. We can also complete the common reporting tables and tabular formats for Article 13. Japan has heard the call for enhanced adaptation finance. Let me repeat Prime Minister Kishida's announcement at the World Leaders Summit. Japan commits to double its assistance for adaptation from previous levels. Japan will deliver its commitment. With these, we can make a brave new start and get our long-standing homework done. This is the time to unite together by adopting the text. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Iceland. Iceland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. While I may be disappointed with certain parts of the text, there is also a lot of encouragement. And most importantly, there is hope. What we have in front of us is a compromise. And let's accept that compromise and support it. Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone outside of those two categories, most importantly, we are keeping 1.5 alive, and we continue in the spirit of cooperation aimed at saving our nature, our environment, our children and grandchildren, and in general, life on Earth. And the next time we meet, we do better. The time after that, even better. We shall not leave empty-handed from Glasgow. Iceland supports and accepts the text. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Iceland, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Chile.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And I'd like, first of all, to associate our intervention with the intervention made by Peru and maybe build from what my distinguished colleague was indicating. And I would like to ask others to thank you very much for your efforts and the work that you have done in your team. And I think we would like to highlight that we have witnessed that many consultations have been made. I think the consultations, of course, we have seen in these 2 weeks were very intensive. We discussed very, very deeply into the topics and into the negotiation issues. But also, I cannot stop myself from thinking about all this time that we had in between COPs, that we had the opportunity to work closely with you and also make a number of copious, really, amount of consultations over the last 2 years. And the point is that we really have had our chance to present our views. And now, when we are overdue with the closing of the COP, it is really too late to make substantive changes in the elements of the package that you have presented to us. And let me be clear, there are a number of items in this package that we don't like. some of our red lines were really crossed in your proposals. And we understand that this was done in the spirit of you finding the compromise that we all need. And in fact, there is important and urgent action that is reflected in the text, and we need to start to implement now, especially in the closing of the ambition gap this decade, and to move decisively in adaptation and finance in line with Article 2 of the Paris Agreement. So we believe that this package is imperfect, but is balanced in the sacrifices that we all have to make to move forward. So our call is to move ahead with this adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, Chile, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Ukraine.
Excellencies, dear Mr. President, we would like to thank you for the hard work conducted to deliver the package of decisions that can allow us to move forward from here in Glasgow on many issues, including markets. We firmly believe that all parties should have equal access to the instruments on Article 6.4 in transitional period. This is not what this text offers, as we have explained to the parties here on numerous occasions. We leave this conference disappointed about the position our country finds itself. At the same time, as many have said before, many parties are disappointed at least a little and wishing for something better in the text. We are hopeful that we can continue to work together and are happy to accept this package and move forward. We hope other parties can join us in accepting the package the Presidency has presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Ukraine, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Colombia.
I would like to thank the Presidency and all the parties really here for the hard work made. I think first of all, I want to align with the intervention made by Peru on behalf of some of the ILAC countries. And I want to highlight the fact that we all gave concessions here and we all committed to a different level of compromise. But I want to highlight that although we all came here with hope, there was a lot of skepticism in the air. A lot of people didn't expect to see real progress on Article 6 or on adaptation, and yet, with some imperfections, I think we're accomplishing remarkable progress. And surely the text does not mean perfectly the hopes and wishes of Colombia. We are a bit disappointed about the lack of progress on the facility on loss and damage, amongst other things. But we cannot downplay the level of accomplishment that has been achieved on the last 2 weeks. And on that note, I echo the voices of other leaders asking us to give this text to the people. The world needs it, young people need it, indigenous and ethnic communities need it. And on that sense, I ask you to close this agreement. This agreement is keeping 1.5 alive, and although it's not perfect, it allows us to keep it alive. Let's get this deal, let's get the COP26 package a chance, and let's start moving towards COP27. Thank you.
Thank you, Colombia, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Trinidad and Tobago associates itself with the statements made by Guinea on behalf of the G77 and China, and Antigua and Barbuda on behalf of AOSIS. We welcome the work that was done by the Presidency and his team to shepherd us to this point. Mr. President, while we also can express disappointment at the outcomes, we also see a package that represents balance, as was said by many other distinguished speakers before me. This outcome is one that we are prepared to accept. All of us have expended a significant amount of political capital to be here for the last 2 weeks in the midst of a global pandemic. We are not prepared to leave empty-handed. When we look at this package, we see progress across the board, albeit not enough. We have made some major strides here that we need to capture so that further progress can be made in the very near future. Mr. President, we have seen progress on adaptation finance. We have seen progress in returning to the table to get our NDCs on track in this critical decade. On loss and damage, while the outcome could have been stronger, we welcome the opportunity to work further and with our partners on this issue. And on carbon markets, there are aspects of the text that could be stronger and more robust, but we are prepared to accept it in its current form. Mr. President, it is time to close the Paris Agreement rulebook, and it has taken a mighty effort to get us to this point. Let us recognize the hard work of all of us, of the compromise that we have reached, and let us proceed to adopt this package and move back home to begin implementation. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you to Trinidad and Tobago for your intervention. I now give the floor to Indonesia. Indonesia, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Thank you for giving me the floor. Mr. President, let me join other colleagues in commenting your hard work and leadership, as well as the spirit for delegations. Indonesia associates itself with the statement made by the Republic of Guinea on behalf of G77 and China. At the beginning of the Glasgow sessions, we are the delegates who present here agreed to complete some pending agenda of Paris Rulebook, as well as to move forward to concrete implementation in form of applicable solutions which are accepted by all and holding the principle of CBDRRC. As we are at the end of Glasgow sessions, nearly, Indonesia expresses the gratitude to your leadership again and to welcome the outcome of the UN Climate Conference in Glasgow. Under your guidance, Mr. President, we are able to nearly finalize the piece of Paris Rulebook. But we are all here aware that this outcome in Glasgow is the starting point for full implementations of Paris Agreement. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, Indonesia would like to resound this concern of other delegates regarding the unbalance of the outcomes. Nevertheless, Indonesia welcomes the progress in elaborating the Paris Rulebook and look forward to concrete future works on this matter, including its means of implementation and in all elements of Paris Agreement's implementations. My delegation has sent out our concern and suggestions to the draft tax decisions to address some lingering issues which are dear to us. Therefore, we would like to have our concern and suggestions to be registered. Mr. President, what is currently certainly needed is not just a balanced tax, but the balance in its implementation, with all the facts of nature that we believe, and with all lessons learned from the implementations of previous COP decisions. There should be no more country parties that do not fulfill their pledge or promises. With the spirit of togetherness, global collaborations, flexibilities, and compromise, Indonesia stands ready to move forward to concrete implementation stage. And we hope that we, as developing country parties to the UNFCCC, and also I hope all parties will be able to pledge higher ambition in the near futures and fulfill their pledge. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Indonesia, for your intervention. I now give the floor to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I would like to thank for your hard effort during 2 weeks for finalizing of our unfinished job from COP25. Mr. President, I have 2 points regarding whatever we discussed during the last 2 weeks. First is on Article 6. Hopefully, outcome of the Article 6 based on voluntary cooperation approach could pave the way for contribution to developing countries. Article 6 on non-market considering how to enhance linkages and create synergy between mitigation, adaptation, finance, technology transfer, and capacity building to facilitate the implementation of coordination of non-market approach. Having said that, achieving to increase fund to adaptation and formulation modalities for share of proceeds required to focus on collective interests. Mr. President, we are not satisfied really on Article 6, especially issue 6.4, and we appointed on supporting the developing countries. My second intervention is related to on COP decision 1/CP26. We are not satisfied on paragraph 36 on phase-up of fossil fuel subsidies. We support India delegation related to fossil fuels, and also, Mr. President, as you know that Iran as a developing country need to use fossil fuel for economic development. And just we are requesting you to modify this paragraph on the decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ran, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Argentina. Argentina, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. We thank you for all your efforts during these weeks. We have worked hard, and we have actively engaged with all delegations to reach an agreement at this COP. We have expressed that there are many issues that still need resolution, but we understand that climate change does not wait. We have come in a spirit of compromise, and therefore we can support the package you have presented us. We understand that this is a package that can help us move forward to concrete action. Argentina is committed to start working from day one after the end of this COP for more and better means of implementations and finance for all developing countries. We will work to ensure the care of our common home and the well-being of our people in the framework of just transition towards sustainable development. A new solidarity is needed since no one is saved alone. As we said yesterday, this must be the COP of raising ambition, but more important, for enabling action. The future of our planet is in our hands, and we will not fail. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you to Argentina for your intervention. I now give the floor to Cuba. Cuba, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Cuba associates itself with the statement made by Guinea on behalf of the G77 and China, and Antigua and Barbuda on behalf of AOSIS, and Bolivia on behalf of the like-minded developing country group. Mr. President, as most of the delegations have said today, Cuba is not happy, is not satisfied with the document we have in front of us. We wanted to see a more ambitious document. We wanted to see a document that clearly reflects the historic responsibility of developed countries in the fight against climate change. We wanted to see a document more ambitious in terms of emission reductions, in terms of provision of means of implementation, finance, capacity building, transfer of technology from developed countries to developing countries. Cuba is a small island developing states, and in this regard we granted a lot of high importance to the struggle against climate change. Cuba has been participated in this process since the very beginning. And frankly speaking, Mr. President, it's not the document we would like to support with satisfaction. As I said, for us, the document should have retained the key principles of the Convention and of the Paris Agreement, namely the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. But above all, we wanted to see a clear commitment on the side of developed countries, historic responsible of the situation of climate that we are facing today. And we don't have this in the document. There is no real balance in the document. Nevertheless, Cuba is very aware of the importance, at least it's a small step forward. And in this spirit and in spirit of compromise, Cuba will join others not expressing objection to this document. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Cuba, for your intervention. I now give the floor to New Zealand. New Zealand, you have the floor.
Mr. President, tēnā koe. I'd like to start by expressing our solidarity with our Pacific Island neighbours whose very existence depends on what all countries here present do collectively over the remaining years of this decade. Mr. President, the world has been arguing about what to do about climate change since at least the 1980s. And in that time, we have emitted as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere as we did in the period of the Industrial Revolution up until that point. In other words, talking about it hasn't solved the problem. And I don't believe that more talk will improve the package presented today. The text represents the least worst outcome. The worst outcome would be to not agree it and to keep talking through next year and deter action for yet another year. Is it enough to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees? Well, Mr. President, I honestly can't say that I think that it does. But we must never, ever give up. And if anything, we must fight even harder than before. New Zealand supports the text. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Thank you, New Zealand, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Venezuela. Venezuela, you have the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President.
In Spanish. En primer lugar,
at the outset, I wish to align this statement with those made by the President of the Group of 77 plus China, in addition to that made by the representative of Bolivia on behalf of the like-minded developing countries group. I also wish to align my statement with those made by the distinguished delegate of India on a very specific issue that Venezuela also mentioned yesterday, which is to do with the relationship that exists between the topic that was introduced into the document on subsidies on Article 13.5 of the Convention. For Venezuela, it's very important that everything to do with climate action is addressed with the same level of attention and concern, because we are all here with a common interest, and that is to prosper when it comes to actions on climate change and also ensure that climate action achieves the sustainable development of nations. For Venezuela, the inclusion of Article 13.5 is a possibility, but it doesn't cover the expectations that we came to COP26 with. We believe that Article 13.5 should not be located in the paragraph on collaboration. Collaborate means working together. It means helping, and it's something that you can or cannot do. For this reason, we think that the reference to Article 13.5 should be in the preamble section and include in the document elements to do with rules on international trade and subsidies. There's mention of subsidies, and it says that there are efficient subsidies and there are other subsidies that are inefficient. So I wish to focus particularly on the need to consider the replacement or the change of the location of Article, or the reference to Article 13.5 in the document, and preferably we would have it in the preambular section, so it would govern all the decisions. And we believe that the reference to Article 13.5 should be included in the preambular part of the mention to the Convention, CMP 1 and CMA 1 of the Paris Agreement. Article 13.5 contains rules that should govern international trade. This is very important. It's very important that this becomes an umbrella reference for all of the decisions, and specifically the reference to unilateral measures, because unilateral measures should be looked at through the lens of climate change, particularly when it comes to the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Unilateral measures, colleagues from the island states have all stated that this is something that place developing countries in a situation of vulnerability that can be equal or worse than the situation, in fact, that small island developing states face. And so it's necessary to underscore the need to consider this paragraph when it comes to the decisions made at COP26. The article on subsidies is extremely important, and on behalf of the government of President Nicolas Maduro, I wish to state that subsidies for fossil fuels are not a taboo in Venezuela. For many years in Venezuela, these types of subsidies have been used for people and for food, and so we believe that it's very important that we don't make these types of distinctions between subsidies for specific sectors and not for others. So in this regard, when it comes to unilateral coercive measures, this needs to be included, and the article on 3.5 of the Convention included in the preamble. We also wish, Mr. President, to express our thanks to the warm welcome that we've received from the inhabitants of the city of Glasgow during our participation in this conference, and we also wish to state that Venezuela is prepared to show flexibility, just like the distinguished colleague from Cuba is prepared to do to support these results. However, we do hope that this concern be put on record and that the decision include the importance of the amendment requested on the location of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Venezuela, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan, you have the floor.
Your Excellency, Mr. President, first of all, let us express our deep gratitude to you and your employees for the productive work carried out over many months. The Kyrgyz Republic, as one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, is aware of the importance of climate change problems and its impact on the economy, and is making every effort to solve it successfully and assumes quite ambitious goals. Kyrgyzstan, being a country with a share of less than 0.03% in the total structure of global emissions, is extremely acutely aware of the consequences of anthropogenic influence and an increase in global temperature, which already lead to natural disasters and emergencies, fluctuations in the water content of mountain rivers, degradation of unique mountain ecosystems, glaciers which occupy about 4% of country territory and form the basins of the Central Asian region, have decreased by 30% over the past 2 decades, having a direct impact on the country's food and energy security and directly affecting our economy. And we are very pleased that this document includes increased funding for adaptation measures, and we would like to know that we support the text of the document under discussion, and we also support Colombia's proposal to transfer this text to use, because today's use will solve today's problem in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyrgyzstan, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Jordan. Jordan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me at the outset to express my deepest gratitude to the UK government and people for the excellent organization and warm hospitality. I would like also to thank the presidency for all the documents that are put to us, which constitute a starting point after 2 weeks of negotiations. In addition to the many constructive initiatives that have been launched on the margins of this conference, we think that they will make a difference when we move to implementation in the future, should these initiatives be closely followed and monitored. Mr. Chair, we don't have enough time to elaborate. However, we need to start, as of now, to invest in every minute in order to stop the deterioration of our planet due to climate change. We in Jordan are amongst the countries that are mostly impacted by climate change, namely when it comes to scarcity of water due to climate change, in addition to the dramatic increase in our population due to massive and forced displacement. We are doing our best in order to limit these impacts at the national level. However, we are aware that we still need to do a lot in terms of adaptation to provide financial resources and to deal with loss and damages. Let us start today. Let us adopt these outcomes, and let us be armed with a good faith and good intentions in order to develop our endeavors continuously, because we are on the same boat. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Jordan, for your intervention. I now give the floor to Nicaragua. Nicaragua, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President.
Nicaragua thanks the government of the United Kingdom for their excellent work and effort during this COP26. And we also are grateful for the important work of the facilitators on climate change. We also express our gratitude to the city and the people of Glasgow for the quality of the hospitality provided to us during this COP26. Nicaragua stated that at the COP21, the Paris Agreement would lead us to a climate crisis. It didn't even ensure the means to implement measures to protect our people. 6 years later, this is being reaffirmed at the COP26. Nicaragua, as a proof of our conviction of the need to work together on the principles of unity and solidarity, and in the face of the climate emergency, we support the results of this COP26. Especially when it comes to ramping up financial resources, adaptation funds, and goals to reduce emissions by 45% by 2030. We're also grateful to the recognition as Mother Earth as key to efforts when it comes to climate change and the leading role that women, young people, and indigenous people can play as stakeholders in territorial actions for the fight against climate change. President, these are not perfect results, but we have reached an understanding. We have recognized problems based on science, and we have also recognized the fact that this is a climate crisis and that a collaborative and constructive spirit is necessary to prevail in order to uphold the pillars of the convention, such as loss, damage, technology transfer, and capacity building. President, despite the fact that we will support the draft decision during this COP26, we do wish to insist on the need to continue to work on the following topics that are fundamental when it comes to climate change. And one of them is giving loss and damage the same level as adaptation and mitigation when it comes to the implementation of the Warsaw and Santiago mechanisms. These are essential when it comes to recognizing forests as essential to fight against climate change and implementing additional financial mechanisms. It's necessary to ensure that reparations are an essential part of climate justice, and delegations need to continue their efforts to reduce emissions as stated by science in order to reach the 1.5-degree goal. President, the impact that this climate change has on the most vulnerable countries is undeniable, and Mother Earth needs to be protected as a place where humanity are considered as one and a whole. Nicaragua believes that the entire international community, without a distinction, needs to commit to continue to work for a world of understanding, peace, justice, solidarity, and development. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Nicaragua, for your intervention. Colleagues, I have two more parties seeking to take the floor. I will, of course, give them both the floor, but if I may request, in the interest of time, unless someone really has a very pressing extra point to make, we try after that to move to the next stage. So with that, I give the floor to Guatemala. Guatemala, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Guatemala identifies with the statement of Peru on behalf of Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, and Honduras, as well as with the individual statements. Mr. President, as we all know it, in life, we always have a choice. We can see the glass half full or half empty. I choose the glass half full because it is hope, and hope alone, the fuel that can bring us in the path that will unite us all in solidarity and in the spirit that gave life to the Paris Agreement. We know that the world is not perfect. The islands have referred to what they are going through due to the rising water of the oceans. Our region in Central America is also suffering from the impacts of climate change. But certainly, there is no place on earth, not any region, that has not been impacted by and is suffering from the global warming that we are presenting here today and we are confronting in these discussions. So, Mr. President, I wonder, why do we have such a hard time to listen to one another and do what is needed to support exactly that? Mr. Chair, Guatemala supports the package as is. knowing that there's still a long way to go. And I just wish that as we all go back home, we must reflect on all the work that is pending and is in our hands to do as a responsible society, because there are many of us in our countries, many of the vulnerable people that are suffering and that are paying the toll. They don't deserve that. We must make a difference. So I do thank you, Mr. President, for all the hard work. And I just want to leave you with a phrase that I heard not long ago. We must do the right thing because it is the right thing to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Guatemala. And now I give the floor to Barbados. Barbados, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for guiding all of our efforts here. Barbados aligns ourselves with the intervention made by Guinea on behalf of G77 and China, and with that made by Antigua and Barbuda on behalf of AOSIS. As we've heard by previous interventions, this, while not the perfect package, is, we believe, a balanced package. It is not free of gaps. There are areas like loss and damage where we need to, and I believe we can, quickly advance some innovative work to inform each of our positions and therefore in turn inform our collective position. Over the last 2 weeks, I have heard a great deal of consensus in these rooms, and this afternoon I hear consensus in this room. Mr. President, I am encouraged by the openness in the text to the ways in which we can meet the scale of the finance required to meet the ambition on mitigation and on adaptation. I believe that with this text, we have a basis on which to accept this agreement and to go forward, but to go forward beyond process, to go forward to strengthen our partnerships and to strengthen those partnerships for the purpose of implementation of the important work that we all have to do. Thank you.
Barbados, thank you very much for that intervention. So friends, thank you for all your interventions. And of course, I do believe that these are ambitious texts, and of course they do test the boundaries of what parties are able to accept on certain issues. And I really do understand how difficult some of these issues are and the very different national circumstances amongst parties in this room. I clearly heard some civic concerns, and I commit that we will continue to work with all of you through our presidency year in partnership on these issues. But as colleagues have acknowledged, these outcomes constitute an incredibly delicate balance. There is a fine and fragile green thread which is weaved around this balanced package. And I do think that if any of us tug at that, it will unravel all too easily. And that is certainly the sentiment that I've heard this afternoon from colleagues. I do think these texts are fully consistent with the goals of the Paris Agreement and the ultimate objective of the Convention. So I do hope that we can leave this conference united, having delivered something significant for our people and planet, together as one. Dear friends, I think what we have seen in this room is a great deal of consensus and support for these texts, imperfect though they may be. And we've also witnessed in this room the vigor of multilateral discussions. And of course, concerns have been expressed. But I do think now is the time to confront our responsibility to our people, to the world, to our planet. And so what I now propose to do is to adjourn this meeting. And we will then convene a formal meeting of the COP to confront these responsibilities and to consider and adopt the outcome of our work here in Glasgow. Meetings of the CMP and the CMA will be convened in conjunction. L documents for consideration by the COP, CMP and CMA are now being uploaded onto the UNFCCC website. This meeting is now adjourned. I would request if you would retain your seats. You need to have a short break, of course, I understand, but we will reconvene very, very shortly, so please stay in the room and we're going to reorganize the podium and then we move to the formal plenary. Thank you.